The monitors are screaming. In Operating Room 3 of Mount Eden Presbyterian, doctors fight to stop the bleeding. The patient is Elena Vance, 32 years old, and she is dying. Her unborn baby's heart rate is plummeting. She is a woman with no next of kin listed, save for one name scribbled on an emergency form, a name that is currently trending worldwide. Harrison Sterling, the billionaire tech mogul, her ex-husband. But as Elena fights for her life and the life of their child, Harrison Sterling is nowhere to be found. He's 2,000 miles away on a private yacht in the Caribbean, placing a $10 million diamond on the finger of his new fiancée, Serafina Dubois. They've just turned off their phones. The August air in Manhattan was thick and oppressive, a heavy, wet blanket that suffocated the city. Elena Vance felt it more than most. At 8 months pregnant, just walking from the subway to her Upper West Side apartment felt like a marathon. This was not the life she had pictured. 2 years ago, she was Mrs. Harrison Sterling. She lived in a triplex penthouse overlooking Central Park, a fortress of glass and steel staffed by people paid to anticipate her every need. Now, she lived in a third-floor walk-up, a charming but crumbling pre-war studio. The divorce had been brutal. Harrison, convinced of an infidelity she never committed, had used his army of lawyers to paint her as a gold digger. He'd won. She'd walked away with almost nothing but her dignity, and as she'd discovered 2 weeks after the ink dried, a secret. A baby. Conceived not during the marriage, but in one single, catastrophic night of weakness after the divorce. A night of whiskey, tears, and a shared history that refused to die. Harrison had shown up at her door, shattered by a business failure, and for one night, they weren't ex-husband and ex-wife. They were just Harry and Eleanor. He was gone before sunrise, the cold billionaire back in place, leaving a note that read, "This was a mistake. She never told him about the pregnancy." What was the point? He already had a new woman, the impossibly chic heiress Serafina Dubois. He had already accused her of fabrication. A baby would just be seen as her final, desperate gambit. So, she decided to do it alone. Today, however, alone felt terrifying. A sharp, searing pain ripped across her abdomen, so intense it stole her breath. She grabbed the cast-iron railing of her apartment stairs, her vision tunneling. "No, no, no," she whispered, her hand instinctively going to her belly. It was rock hard. "Not yet, little one. Please. Not yet." Another wave hit, a violent contraction that buckled her knees. She collapsed onto the landing, a small cry escaping her lips. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking. She managed to dial her best friend, Chloe Jensen. "Hey, Elle, I'm just leaving the office. Want me to pick up—" "Chloe!" Elena gasped, the word choked with pain. "Something's wrong. The stairs. I can't." The line was filled with Chloe's sudden, sharp panic. "Where are you? Are you at home? On the landing? So much pain, Chloe. I think I'm bleeding." She looked down. A dark, terrifying pool was spreading on the worn linoleum. Chloe's voice was pure adrenaline. "I'm calling 911. They'll be there in 2 minutes. Hang on, Elena. Do you hear me? Hang on." Elena heard sirens in the distance, but they sounded like they were underwater. The world was shrinking to a pinprick of light. Her last conscious thought was a desperate primal prayer. "Save my baby. Please, save my baby." The paramedics found her unconscious, her vital signs crashing. They didn't wait for the gurney, carrying her down the stairs and into the ambulance, which tore through the evening traffic, lights and sirens screaming. 32-year-old female, G1P0, 34 weeks, the medic shouted as they burst through the trauma bay doors of Mount Eden Presbyterian. Massive vaginal bleeding, suspected placental abruption, BP is 80/40 and dropping. Fetal heart rate is in the 60s. A team descended. The charge nurse, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, began cutting away Elena's clothes, while another jabbed an 18-gauge IV into her arm. "Page Dr. Thorne, stat!" Linda yelled. "And get the OR prepped for a code crimson. We're moving now." Dr. Aris Thorne, the hospital's chief of maternal-fetal medicine, met them at the OR doors. He was a man who thrived in chaos, his face a mask of calm authority. He scanned Elena's chart as they ran. "Full abruption. She's already in DIC. We've got maybe 3 minutes to get this baby out before we lose them both. Who's the father? Who is next of kin?" Chloe Jensen skidded to a stop outside the doors, her face pale with terror. I'm her friend. Chloe Jensen. Is she?" "She's in critical condition," Dr. Thorne said, his voice kind but clipped. "We're taking her for an emergency C-section right now. We need consent." "Do it! Whatever you need." "Are you family?" "No, but..." "We need to contact family. A husband. The father." Chloe's hands were shaking so hard she could barely unlock her phone. Her ex-husband. Oh God, it's Harrison Sterling." A junior nurse's eyes went wide. "Harrison Sterling. The Harrison Sterling?" Dr. Thorne silenced her with a look. "Call him. Now. Tell him it's a matter of life and death." He pushed through the OR doors. "Let's go, people. We are out of time." Chloe leaned against the sterile green wall, her heart hammering. She pulled up the contact, the one labeled "Do Not Call," and hit the button. It went straight to a crisp, professional voicemail. "You have reached the office of Harrison Sterling, CEO of Sterling Dynamics. I am currently unavailable and will not be reachable until August 15th. For all business inquiries, please contact my assistant, Marcus Cole." "Unavailable?" Chloe whispered, her voice cracking. "He's unavailable." She tried his personal number. It rang once, then a synthesized voice. "The mobile customer you are calling is outside of the service area." Chloe frantically dialed the assistant, Marcus Cole. He picked up on the first ring. "Marcus Cole?" "Marcus, it's Chloe Jensen, Elena's friend. You need to find him. You need to find Harrison now." There was a sigh on the other end. "Ms. Jensen, as I've told you before, Mr. Sterling's directives regarding Miss Vance are very clear." "She's dying!" Chloe screamed into the phone, her voice echoing in the hallway. "Do you understand me? She's in surgery at Mount Eden Presbyterian. She's bleeding to death, and they're trying to save her baby. His baby." "You find him. You find him, or I swear to God, I will tear down his entire empire." There was a stark, terrified silence on the other end. I'll see what I can do." "Don't see," Chloe sobbed. "Do it!" She hung up and sank to the floor, staring at the red, operating light. Inside that room, Elena was fighting for her life, and the one person who should have been there was, quite literally, a world away. 2,000 miles southeast, in the turquoise waters of the Grenadines, Harrison Sterling had never felt more alive. He stood on the aft deck of the Cerulean, his 300-foot super yacht, a $200 million testament to his own brilliance. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent hues of orange and purple. In his hand was a glass of Macallan 72. Beside him was Seraphina Dubois. Seraphina was not just beautiful. She was an acquisition. Her family, the Dubois banking dynasty of Paris, was the key to Harrison's long-sought European expansion. Their merger was a marriage in every sense of the word. She was sharp, ambitious, and utterly unsentimental, everything, he now believed, Elena had not been. "It's perfect, Harry," Seraphina murmured, leaning her head on his shoulder. Her hand was resting conspicuously on the deck railing, a 15-carat, emerald-cut diamond, the Veblen diamond, catching the last rays of light. Utterly perfect. "Only the best for you, darling," he said, kissing her hair. He felt a deep, profound sense of peace. He'd ordered a complete communications blackout for 48 hours. No calls, no emails, no market reports. Just him, his fiancée, and the open ocean. It was a celebration of their engagement, which would be announced in Vogue the moment they were back in range. His personal phone and work phone were locked in the captain's safe. He was, for the first time in a decade, completely and blissfully unreachable. He thought, fleetingly, of Elena. The divorce had been a necessary amputation. He'd convinced himself she had cheated, seizing on a harmless lunch with a male friend as irrefutable proof. His pride, more than his heart, had been wounded. He needed to be the one to end it, to control the narrative. The night he'd gone to her apartment. That had been a mistake, a moment of weakness, of stupid nostalgia. He'd been drunk. It meant nothing. "What are you thinking about?" Serafina asked, her voice lazy. "The merger," he lied smoothly. "When your father and I sign, we'll control the entire satellite market. It will be a dynasty." "To us, then?" She smiled, raising her champagne. "To the dynasty." Back in New York, Marcus Cole was in a cold sweat. He sat in the sterile, silent lobby of Sterling Dynamics on the 80th floor. He knew about the communications blackout. It was Serafina's idea. No distractions, she'd purred. But life and death trumped a fiancé's whim. He was Harrison's fixer. He knew everything. He knew about the private investigator Harrison had hired to follow Elena. He knew the PI had reported 6 months ago that Elena was pregnant. He'd been there when Harrison had read the report, his face hardening. "It's not mine," Harrison had stated, tossing the photos onto his desk. "It's a trap. She's trying to nullify the divorce settlement. Not 1 cent, Marcus. Not 1 word. We deny everything." Now Marcus was staring at his screen, trying to find the cerulean. Harrison had a transponder, but he'd also installed a dark mode switch for when he wanted to truly vanish. The yacht was dark. "Damn it, Harrison," Marcus muttered. He tried the yacht's satellite emergency number. It was routed to an automated message. "The cerulean is on private passage and is not accepting incoming transmissions." He got a call from the hospital. "Mr. Cole? This is Dr. Thorne. I'm afraid Miss Vance is post-op, but she's in the ICU. She's in a medically induced coma. She had a severe placental abruption leading to DIC. We had to perform an emergency C-section and a subsequent hysterectomy to save her life." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. A hysterectomy? She was bleeding out. It was that or let her die on the table. The baby, a boy, is in the NICU. He's 34 weeks, 3 pounds, and in critical condition. He's a fighter, but he's very, very sick. We really need Mr. Sterling here. A baby boy. A hysterectomy. Elena could never have another child. And Harrison was celebrating his engagement. The sheer, catastrophic ugliness of the situation settled on Marcus. This was beyond PR. This was a 5-alarm fire. I will find him, Marcus said, his voice hollow. I will move heaven and earth. He hung up and did the one thing he was expressly forbidden from doing. He called the Coast Guard. He gave them the cerulean's private identification number. "I need you to relay an emergency message to this vessel on the maritime distress frequency," Marcus said, his voice shaking. Tell Harrison Sterling his son has been born, and the mother is dying." The operating room had looked like a war zone. Dr. Aris Thorne had been a surgeon for 20 years, and this was one of the worst abruptions he'd ever seen. Elena Vance's blood, thin as water from the disseminated intravascular coagulation, DIC, refused to clot. They had transfused over 30 units, more than 3 times her body's entire volume. The baby, Leo, had been delivered in under 2 minutes. He was pale, limp, and silent. A neonatal team, led by Dr. Diaz, had worked on him in the corner, suctioning, stimulating, and finally inserting a breathing tube into his tiny trachea. A faint, struggling cry, thin as a kitten's, filled the air for a second before he was whisked away to the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU. Elena, however, was still crashing. "I can't get the bleeding to stop!" a resident yelled, her face mask spattered with blood. "The uterus won't contract. It's completely atonic," Thorne said, his voice dangerously calm. "We're out of options. She's thrown clots to her lungs. If we don't get this bleeding stopped, she'll be dead in 5 minutes." He looked at his team. "We have to take the uterus. It's the only way. Get the hysterectomy tray. Now." For another 2 hours they fought. They fought the bleeding. They fought the clotting disorder. They fought the dropping blood pressure. Finally, painstakingly, they stabilized her. They packed her abdomen, wheeled her to the surgical ICU, and put her into a medically induced coma to let her body rest. Dr. Thorne stripped off his bloody gloves and scrubs, feeling the exhaustion hit him like a physical blow. He walked out to find Chloe Jensen, curled up on a plastic chair, her face tear-streaked. She shot to her feet. "Is she?" "She's alive," Thorne said gently. Chloe crumpled in relief. "But Miss Jensen, she is not out of the woods. Not by a long shot. The next 24 hours are critical. We had to perform an emergency hysterectomy to save her." Chloe's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, God. Elena. She always wanted a big family." "She's alive," Thorne repeated, his eyes filled with a tired sadness. "Right now, that is the victory. And the baby? He's in the NICU. He's critical, but he's stable for now. Dr. Diaz is with him. He's a very small boy in a very big fight." Chloe nodded, wiping her face. "Can I see her?" "She's in the CCU, room 6. She's intubated. She won't know you're there." "She'll know," Chloe said, her voice hardening with a sudden, fierce resolve. "I'll be there, and I will find Harrison." She stalked away, pulling out her phone. Her attempt to reach Marcus had failed again. His line was busy. She'd left 3 voicemails. "Fine," she muttered, her fingers flying across the screen. "You want to hide, Harrison? Let's see how you hide from this." She opened her Instagram, found the contact for Gia Romano, and sent a direct message. Gia was the city's most ruthless gossip columnist, the woman behind the NYC Nightly blog, which was read by every banker, socialite, and media mogul in the city. Chloe typed, "Gia, I have a story that will break the internet. Harrison Sterling, his ex-wife, Elena Vance, is in a coma at Mount Eden. Just had his baby. He's on a yacht with Serafina Dubois and is unreachable. Call me. This is 100% real." 3 seconds later, her phone rang. "This is Gia. Talk to me. On the Cerulean. The party was winding down. Harrison and Serafina were reclined on a daybed, watching the stars, the champagne bucket empty beside them. A crew member, a young man named Stefan, approached, his face ashen. He was holding a small, black device. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption. This is highly irregular, but we just received a Priority 1 distress signal." Harrison sat up, annoyed. "A distress signal? From who?" "Not from someone, sir. For you. From the U.S. Coast Guard. They patched it through on the Maritime Emergency Channel." Serafina scoffed. "That's absurd. Tell them to wait." "Ma'am, I cannot. It's a coded life or death message from a Mr. Marcus Cole." Stefan held out the receiver. Harrison snatched it, his brow furrowed. "Marcus! What the hell is so important?" He listened. The connection was static-filled, but the words were clear. Elena Vance. Critical. Mount Eden. Placental abruption. Emergency C-section. A son. In a coma. Repeating, Harrison. You have a son. The mother is... The blood drained from Harrison's face. The glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the teak deck. Harry, Serafina said, sitting up. What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost. He didn't answer. He was staring at the dark water. A son. In a coma. It's a lie, he said, his voice quiet. What's a lie? It's her. Elena. It's a trick. A financial play. She's not... It's not... What is it, Harrison? Serafina demanded. She's at Mount Eden. She's had a baby. Serafina's eyes narrowed. The softness was gone, replaced by cold calculation. The baby. The one your PI told you about. She's claiming it's mine. She's in a coma. It's a complete fabrication to ruin our engagement announcement. Of course it is, Serafina said, standing up. It's pathetic. She's just so dramatic. How dare she try to ruin this? We'll have your lawyer send a cease and desist to the hospital. Sir, Stefan, the crewman, interrupted again, looking even more terrified. The communications blackout is over. We're in range of the St. Vincent Tower. The internet is back on. Harrison's personal phone, which Stefan was holding, lit up. It vibrated so violently on the silver tray, it sounded like a trapped hornet. Hundreds of notifications flooded the screen. He picked it up. The top alert was from Google, a trending news item. NYC Nightly, exclusive, billionaire Harrison Sterling celebrates engagement to heiress Serafina Dubois, while ex-wife Elena Vance fights for life after emergency birth of his son. The article, by Gia Romano, was brutal. It had quotes from an anonymous friend, Chloe. It had details, the hysterectomy, the NICU, the unreachable yacht. It painted Harrison not as a titan, but as a monster. Oh my God, Harrison whispered. He clicked on his stock ticker. Sterling Dynamics, SDY, was in after-hours trading. It was plunging. 8%, 10%, 12%. The Dubois merger was contingent on a stable stock price and, more importantly, a clean public image. This is a catastrophe, he breathed. It's a shakedown, Harry, Serafina insisted, her voice rising. She is extorting you. You cannot give in to this. If you go to that hospital, you admit guilt. You admit that child is yours. If I don't go, Harrison said, his mind racing, I lose the company. The board is meeting in the morning. They're going to invoke the morals clause. This child just cost me $10 billion. He grabbed the sat phone. Captain, get the helicopter ready. We're flying to the mainland now. File a flight plan to New York. I don't care what it costs. Harry, no! Serafina yelled. Don't you dare leave me here! This is not about you, Harrison roared, the charm gone, the ruthless CEO back in full force. This is about my company. Marcus, he yelled into the phone. Get a paternity test kit to the hospital. I want a sample from that child the second I land. I'm going to prove this is a lie, and then I am going to ruin her. I will sue her back to the Stone Age. He stormed off toward the helicopter pad, leaving Serafina standing alone on the deck, the 15-carat diamond on her hand suddenly looking cold and lifeless. The flight from St. Vincent to New York was 5 hours of controlled fury. Harrison Sterling didn't sleep. He was on the phone with his legal team, his PR team, and the board of directors. The narrative is this, he barked into his headset, the jet's engine a dull roar beneath him. My ex-wife, from whom I have been divorced for nearly a year, has tragically suffered a medical emergency. I was on a pre-scheduled business retreat and was unreachable. I am rushing to her side to offer my support as a friend. We deny, categorically, that the child is mine. We are cooperating with the hospital and will be conducting a paternity test to disprove these malicious, slanderous rumors. Mr. Sterling, his lead lawyer, David, cut in. A word of caution. If that test comes back positive— It won't, Harrison snapped. It's not mine. I know for a fact she was seeing someone else. That's why I divorced her. It was a lie he had told so often. He'd started to believe it. He landed at Teterboro Airport at 4 a.m. A black Cadillac Escalade was waiting on the tarmac. 20 minutes later, he strode through the automatic doors of Mount Eden Presbyterian, a phalanx of 2 bodyguards and 3 lawyers surrounding him. The lobby was empty, save for one person. Chloe Jensen was asleep in a chair, her head on her knees. She woke with a start as the entourage swept in. She saw Harrison, his face a mask of cold fury, his bespoke suit unrumpled. She shot to her feet. All the grief, all the fear, all the rage of the last 12 hours coalesced into a single, white-hot point. She marched straight up to him. Harrison saw her coming, his eyes narrowing. "Miss Jensen, this is not the time." Smack! The sound of her palm connecting with his cheek echoed in the cavernous, silent lobby. Harrison's head snapped to the side. His lawyers froze. His bodyguards tensed but didn't move. Chloe was breathing heavily, her hand stinging. "You!" she seethed, her voice a low, dangerous growl. "You did this! She's in a coma. She may never wake up. They took— Oh God, Elena. And you were celebrating." Harrison straightened, his cheek bright red. His voice was ice. "Get her out of my way." "You monster!" Chloe shrieked, lunging at him again, but the bodyguards caught her arms. "She's upstairs dying and you're bringing lawyers? You're worried about your stock price?" "I am here," Harrison said, his voice lethally precise, "to put an end to this circus. I am here for a paternity test, and then I am here to file a lawsuit against you for slander, and against her for fraud." "Fraud?" Chloe laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "You think she planned this? You think she ruptured her own placenta for money?" "Mr. Sterling?" Dr. Thorne had appeared, his face grim. He'd been woken by the commotion. "This is a hospital, not a boardroom. You can release the young lady." The guards let Chloe go. She stumbled back, sobbing in pure frustration. "Dr. Thorne," Harrison said, smoothing his suit. "My lawyers have the paperwork. We are formally requesting a DNA test on the child currently in the NICU, listed as Baby Boy Vance." Dr. Thorne's eyes were chips of steel. "Mr. Sterling, my priority is the health of my patients, both of them. Your son is fighting for his life, and Elena is in a coma. This is not the time for legal games. This is not a game." Harrison's lawyer, David, stepped forward, holding a folder. "We have a court order, signed by Judge Peterson an hour ago, compelling a buccal swab. We can do this peacefully, or we can do this with hospital security." Dr. Thorne stared at the paper for a long moment. He was disgusted, but he was also bound by the law. "Fine," he said. "The NICU is a sterile environment. You and your lawyers wait here. You," he pointed at Harrison, "can come with me. One of you. That's it." Harrison nodded. "David, you wait." He followed Dr. Thorne through the locked doors of the CCU, down a long, quiet hall, to another set of locked doors. The NICU. The sound was a low, steady hum of machinery, dim lights, beeping monitors. It was a room of tiny glass boxes, each one holding a life that had barely begun. "He's over here," Dr. Thorne said, his voice hushed. They stopped in front of an incubator in the corner. "Baby Boy Vance," the card read. Inside, wires and tubes seemed to hold together a creature so small, Harrison couldn't process it. He was tiny, his skin a translucent red, his chest rising and falling in shallow, machine-assisted breaths. He was the smallest human Harrison had ever seen. A nurse was already there, holding a long, sterile swab. "I just need to swab his cheek, doctor." She gently opened the incubator porthole, the alarm beeping softly, and rubbed the swab inside the baby's mouth. The baby didn't even flinch. "There," she said, placing the swab in a biohazard bag and handing it to Harrison's lawyer, who had been permitted to watch from the doorway. Harrison just stared. He stared at the impossibly small, perfect fingers. He stared at the tuft of dark hair, the same color as his. "He doesn't look like anything," Harrison murmured, more to himself. "He looks like a 34-week preemie who just survived a catastrophic trauma," Dr. Thorne said coldly. "He's fighting. He has his mother's heart, it seems." Harrison's phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Test results will be expedited. Lab is standing by. We'll have it in 4 hours." "I'm done here," Harrison said, turning abruptly. "Call me when there's a change in either of them." He walked out, past Chloe, who was being comforted by a nurse. He didn't look at her. He went to a private waiting room his team had secured, sat down, and waited for the test that would prove him right. As he sat there, the sterile hospital silence invading his consciousness, his mind betrayed him. It went back to that night. It was raining. A cold, miserable March night, 2 weeks after the divorce. His first major deal without Elena by his side had collapsed. He'd been humiliated. He hadn't gone to Serafina's. He'd gone to Eleanor's. He'd pounded on her door, drunk, holding a bottle of whiskey. She'd opened it, her hair in a messy bun, wearing an old college sweatshirt. His old sweatshirt. "Harry, what's wrong?" He'd pushed past her into the tiny apartment that smelled like her, like lavender and old books. "It's all ruined," he'd said, slumping onto her sofa. They pulled out." She hadn't gloated. She hadn't said, "I told you so." She'd just sat next to him, taken the bottle, and poured 2 glasses. "Tell me," she'd said. And he had. For hours. He'd raged, and he'd confessed, and he'd cried, for the first time in his adult life. He'd told her he missed her, that the penthouse was empty, that Serafina was cold. "You did this, Harry," Elena had said, her voice soft but firm. "You believed a lie because your pride was more important than your trust." "I know," he'd whispered. "God, Elena, I know." And he had kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, a raw, painful collision of regret and memory. It was the only thing that had felt real in months. He'd woken at 4 a.m., the self-loathing crashing down on him. Her arm was slung across his chest. He'd felt a moment of pure panic. This was weakness. This was regression. Serafina, the merger, the future. That was the plan. He had disentangled himself, found his clothes, and left. He'd left a $100 bill on the counter for the whiskey and a note. This was a mistake. He hadn't spoken to her since. Now, sitting in the waiting room, a cold dread, heavier than any market crash, settled in his stomach. "It's not mine." The word sounded hollow, even in his own head. Serafina Dubois did not wait in the Caribbean. She chartered her own jet and was in New York by 6 a.m. But she didn't go to the hospital. She went to her suite at the Carlyle. She was not a fool. This was not a problem to be solved with emotion. It was a hostile takeover. Elena and this child were a competing entity threatening her merger, and Serafina always won. She made 2 calls. The first was to her father in Paris. "The merger is in jeopardy," she said in rapid-fire French. "Harrison's ex-wife has manufactured a crisis. A baby. He's handling it, but he's compromised. I need you to issue a statement putting pressure on the Sterling board. Leak that the Dubois family is re-evaluating the partnership pending this domestic uncertainty." The second call was to a private investigator of her own. "I want everything on Eleanor Vance," she ordered. "Every man she's spoken to in the last year. I don't care if it's fabricated. I need a different father. Find one. Create one." But she knew that would take time. She needed to act now. She put on a black Chanel suit, oversized sunglasses, and had her driver take her to Mount Eden. She didn't go to the main entrance. She went to the cafeteria, where she'd been told Chloe Jensen was getting coffee. She found Chloe at a small table, her head in her hands, an untouched coffee cup in front of her. Serafina glided into the opposite chair. Chloe looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Who are you?" "My name is Serafina Dubois." Chloe's exhaustion vanished, replaced by a fresh, hot surge of hatred. "Get out!" "Listen to me," Serafina said, her voice low and smooth. "You care about Elena. I care about Harrison. We both have a problem. This situation is bad for everyone. It's ugly, it's public, and it's ruining my fiancé's life." "Your fiancé? Lady, he's the father of Eleanor's baby, and he left her to die." "That is a narrative. It's not a fact," Serafina said, opening her pristine white leather handbag. She slid a checkbook and a Mont Blanc pen onto the sticky table. "I am prepared to offer a solution, a trust fund, for Elena and the child. Let's say $20 million. Chloe stared at the checkbook as if it were a snake. $20 million, Serafina continued, to cover all medical bills and to set them up for life. Anywhere they want. California, Australia. It doesn't matter. All that's required is a simple non-disclosure agreement and a statement, a retraction, clarifying that the child is not Harrison's, that it was all a tragic misunderstanding. Chloe was silent, her expression unreadable. "She'll never have to work again," Serafina urged. "The baby will be taken care of. This is a gift, Ms. Jensen. It's the only clean way out of this mess. Otherwise, Harrison's lawyers will destroy her. They will prove she's an unfit mother, that this was all a scam, and she will get nothing. He will fight her until she has not one penny left." Chloe finally looked up, her eyes clear. You're offering to buy my best friend's baby? I'm offering a practical solution to a biological problem. And what if I say no? Then I will be forced to release the information I have about Elena's activities after the divorce. It won't be pleasant for anyone. Chloe slowly reached into her own pocket. She pulled out her iPhone and placed it on the table. The screen was on, and the Voice Memos app was running. The timer read 04:32. "I think," Chloe said, her voice shaking but triumphant, "Gia Romano is going to love this." Serafina's face went white. The mask of polished indifference shattered, revealing pure, unadulterated rage. She lunged for the phone, but Chloe snatched it away. "You bitch!" Serafina hissed. "Get out of this hospital!" Chloe ordered. "Get out before I call security." Serafina stood, her entire body vibrating. She grabbed her checkbook and stormed out, her heels clicking like gunshots on the linoleum. Chloe's hands were trembling, but she was smiling. "Got you," she whispered. She immediately emailed the audio file to Gia Romano. Upstairs in the private waiting room, Harrison's lawyer, David, returned. He was holding a single, sealed manila envelope. "The lab just sent it over," David said, his face grim. Harrison stood. His heart was hammering. This was it. The proof. The weapon he needed to end this. He tore open the envelope. It was a single page, covered in genetic markers and probabilities. He skipped to the bottom line. Probability of paternity. 999.999%. Harrison read the line once, Twice, 3 times. The words wouldn't compute. "No," he whispered. "No, it's wrong. The lab is wrong. They fumbled the sample." "Harry," David said softly, "it's a certified lab. They ran it twice. That's the result." Harrison sank into the chair. The floor dropped out from beneath him. "It's not mine. It's not mine. It's not mine." It was his. A son. A son he had denied. A son he had left to die. A son whose mother was in a coma. A mother whose body was broken. Who could never have more children because of this. "She's trying to ruin me. It's a shakedown. I will sue her back to the Stone Age." His own voice echoed in his head, sounding monstrous. "Oh my God," he breathed, the words hollow. What have I done?" He looked at the paper, at the clinical proof of his lie, of his profound, catastrophic failure as a human being. At that exact moment, down the hall in the CICU, Elena Vance's eyelids fluttered. A nurse, checking her vitals, saw it. "Dr. Thorne?" the nurse called out. I think she's waking up." The awakening was not a gentle rising to the surface. It was a violent, clawing ascent from a dark, cold, and bottomless ocean. Elena Vance felt like she was drowning and breathing at the same time. The first sensation was a raw, scraping fire in her throat, the burn of the endotracheal tube. The second was a profound, echoing emptiness in her abdomen, a hollowed-out feeling that felt both physical and spiritual. She was heavy, yet she felt gone. Her eyelids, caked and heavy, fluttered open. The light of the CICU was a blinding, sterile white. Alarms she hadn't consciously heard were now beeping in a steady, invasive rhythm. A blurry face swam into view, resolving itself into the kind, tired eyes of Dr. Aris Thorne. "Elena? Can you hear me?" His voice was calm, filtering through the fog. "You're at Mount Eden Hospital. You've been very, very sick. You had a baby." The baby. The word was a lightning strike. The memory, swift and brutal, returned. The agony on the stairs, the cold linoleum, the spreading dark pool of blood. The primal, desperate prayer. "Save my baby." Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She tried to speak, but only a dry, rasping gasp came out. She tried to move, to sit up, to clutch the empty space where her baby had been. A constellation of fire erupted across her midsection, a pain so blinding it stole her breath again. The monitors beside her bed shrieked, their rhythm turning frantic. "Easy, easy," Dr. Thorne said, a nurse at his side, gently easing her back down. "Don't try to move. You've had a major surgery. The baby is okay. He's in the NICU. He's a fighter, Elena. You're both fighters." He was alive. The panic receded, replaced by a flood of tears that streamed silently into her hairline. He was alive. She pointed a trembling finger to her throat, her eyes pleading. "We're going to take the tube out," Dr. Thorne said, nodding. "But you have to stay calm. Can you do that for me?" "Just nod." She nodded. The procedure was quick, uncomfortable, and ended with a deep, ragged cough that sent another wave of agony through her. The relief, however, was immediate. She licked her cracked lips, her throat feeling like sandpaper. Her first word was a desperate, broken whisper. "Leo." Dr. Thorne paused, confused. "Leo? His name," she rasped, the tears still flowing. I was going to name him Leo." Is he really?" "He is," Dr. Thorne said, a small, genuine smile touching his face. "He's really alive. He's 3 pounds, 4 ounces, and he's breathing with some help. He's in the NICU, just 1 floor down. He's beautiful." Elena wept, a raw, silent sob of pure, unadulterated relief. But the doctor's face was still heavy. There was more. "Elena," he said, his voice dropping. "We had to fight very hard to save you. The abruption was severe. You were bleeding, catastrophically. We had to transfuse more blood than your body holds. I don't understand." "The bleeding was from your uterus," he said, his words precise and devastatingly gentle. "It would not stop. We tried everything. We had no other choice. To save your life, Elena, we had to perform an emergency hysterectomy." The words hung in the sterile air. Hysterectomy? Elena stared at him, not comprehending. The relief from moments before froze, turning brittle. "What?" she whispered. "We had to remove your uterus," he clarified, his gaze unwavering. "It was the only way to stop the bleeding. It was that, or you would not have survived." The hollow feeling in her abdomen suddenly had a name. It was permanent. She was 32 years old. She had always dreamed of a loud, messy house, full of children. She looked from the doctor's sad eyes to her own hand, resting on the flat, bandaged space beneath the hospital gown. Leo. The baby she had just met, she now realized, was the only child she would ever have. The finality of it was a second, separate trauma, a quiet, cold grief that settled over her, heavier than any blanket. "Oh God," she whispered, turning her face away, a new set of tears beginning their silent track. "Oh God." Harrison Sterling walked like a man in a trance. He had left his lawyers, his entourage, and his ringing phone in the private waiting room. David had tried to stop him, to talk strategy, but Harrison had just waved him off, his eyes vacant. In his hand, he held the crumpled, single-page report. Probability of paternity, 99.99999%. The words were an epitaph for the man he had been. He walked past the nurse's station, past the 6U room, where, unknown to him, Elena was just waking up. He went back to the double doors of the NICU. He scrubbed his hands for the required 3 minutes, the hot water scalding him, but he barely felt it. He scrubbed his knuckles, his wrists, his forearms, as if he could wash away the filth of the last 48 hours. He gowned and gloved. He stopped in front of the incubator in the corner. "Baby boy Vance," the card read. He reached into his pocket and, with a shaking hand, pulled out a pen. He crossed out Vance and, in his neat, aggressive script, wrote Leo Sterling. He stood there, just staring at this impossibly small, fragile creature kept alive by a network of wires and tubes. His son. The weight of his denial, his arrogance, his sheer, breathtaking cruelty crashed down on him. He hadn't just been wrong, he had been monstrous. He had slandered the mother of his child. He had called her a liar, a fraud, an extortionist. He had been sipping champagne, celebrating his bloodless corporate merger of a marriage, while she was here, bleeding out, sacrificing her body to save the son he had disowned. The nurse, the same one from before, approached him gently. "Mr. Sterling, you're back." Yes, he said, his voice sounding rusty, unused. Would you like to hold him?" she asked, her voice soft. "Kangaroo care, skin to skin. It's very good for him. It regulates his heart rate, his breathing." Harrison looked at her, terrified. Can I? He's so small. I'll break him." "You won't," she smiled. "He's tougher than he looks. Sit here." She pointed to a padded rocking chair. "Unbutton your shirt." Numbly, he did as he was told. He sat, unbuttoning his $2,000 Sea Island cotton shirt. The nurse, with a practiced, gentle expertise, navigated the wires. She lifted the tiny 3-pound baby from the incubator and placed him directly on Harrison's bare chest. The warmth was immediate. A tiny bird-like body, so light he felt like a whisper, so hot he felt like a tiny furnace. Leo's head, with its tuft of dark, damp hair, rested just below his collarbone. Harrison Sterling stopped breathing. He looked down at the translucent skin, the tiny, paper-thin fingernails. He felt the shallow, machine-assisted flutter of his son's chest against his own, and then a small, primal miracle. Leo's impossibly small hand, no bigger than Harrison's thumbnail, flexed and, with surprising strength, gripped a tuft of his chest hair. Harrison Sterling, the man who controlled markets, who built empires from code, who destroyed rivals without a second thought, broke. It was not a single tear. It was a complete, silent, and agonizing collapse. A deep, shuddering sob tore through him, a sound of such profound, self-loathing and regret that the nurse quietly turned away to give him privacy. He bowed his head, shielding his son, and wept. He wept for his lie, for his pride, for the night of the divorce, for the night he'd gone to her apartment, and for the note he'd left. This was a mistake. He had been the mistake. He sat there for an hour, the rocking chair still. When he finally composed himself, the tears replaced by a cold, heavy certainty, he knew what he had to do. He placed Leo back in the incubator, his hand lingering for a moment on the warm plastic. He stripped off the gown and walked to Elena's room. Chloe was there, sitting by the bed, holding Elena's hand, a cup of ice chips on the table. She looked up as Harrison's shadow fell across the doorway. Her face, already pale and tear-streaked, hardened into a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. "Get out," she seethed, rising from her chair. "Now, she's awake. She doesn't need to see the monster that did this to her." "Chloe, please," Harrison said. His voice was raw, stripped of all its power and arrogance. It was the voice of a stranger. I have to." From the bed, a weak, rasping voice. "Chloe, who is it?" Chloe didn't take her eyes off Harrison. "It's him." A long, heavy silence. Then, Elena's voice, barely audible but firm. "Let him in, Chloe. It's okay. Just for a minute." Chloe stared at her friend, shocked, but Elena nodded. Chloe gave Harrison one last look that promised murder, then stepped outside, pulling the door almost closed, but not quite. Harrison walked in. The room smelled of antiseptic and grief. Elena looked impossibly small and shattered in the large mechanical bed. IVs snaked into both her arms. When she saw him, her expression wasn't anger. It was just empty. A deep, profound, devastating exhaustion. "Harry," she whispered. He stopped at the foot of her bed, the paternity test still crumpled in his fist. He was the most powerful man she had ever known, and he looked like a condemned prisoner. I saw him," Harrison said, his voice thick. "Our son, Leo. I wrote his name on the card." Elena's eyes, which had been so dull, flashed with a protective fire. You saw him?" "I held him," he whispered. "Elena, He didn't know how to say it. "I'm sorry I left you to die. I'm sorry I called you a liar. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I destroyed your body." "I got the test," he said instead, mechanically, holding up the crumpled paper. I know. He's mine. I know." A small, bitter sound escaped Elena's throat, a laugh that turned into a painful cough. She winced, holding her abdomen. You needed a test? You needed a piece of paper? You couldn't just look at him? You couldn't remember that night, Harry?" "Elena, I was wrong. I was a fool. My pride, God, I was so wrong." "Your pride," she said, her voice gaining a thin, reedy strength, an anger born from the deepest pain. "Your pride, Harry. Do you know what it cost? Dr. Thorne told me. A hysterectomy. Do you know what that means? They took it. It's gone." He flinched as if she had struck him. I'll fix this, he said, desperate, falling back on his only reflex, the one that had solved every problem in his life. I'll get you the best doctors in the world. I'll pay for everything. I'll set up a trust, whatever you need. 50 million, 100. Stop, she commanded. The word was quiet, but it had the force of a thunderclap. He stopped. Just stop talking. You think your money can fix this? You think you can buy me a new womb? The word was a sob. I don't want your money. I don't want your doctors. I want my baby. I want my son to be healthy. And I want you to go. Elena, please, he begged, taking a step closer. Go, she cried, her voice cracking, the monitors starting to beep in protest. Get out, I can't look at you. Please, Harry, go. He stood there for a full, agonizing minute, a titan reduced to nothing by a single, whispered word. He had been eviscerated, and he knew he deserved it. He slowly, deliberately, placed the crumpled paternity test on her bedside table, next to the cup of ice chips. I'll be back, he said, his voice hollow. I'll check on Leo. He turned and walked out. Chloe was waiting in the hall, her arms crossed, her phone in her hand. She doesn't want to see you, Chloe said. I know, Harrison replied. He felt 1,000 years old. As he said it, his phone, which he'd left with his lawyer, began to ring. David came running down the hall, his face pale, holding the phone out. Harry, it's the board. They're on an emergency line, and you need to see this. David turned his own phone's screen to Harrison. The NYC Nightly blog was on fire. The headline was catastrophic. Exclusive audio. $20 million. Hear billionaire fiancée Serafina Dubois. Try to buy off Harrison Sterling's ex-wife and baby. The audio file was embedded. David pressed play. Serafina's cold, pristine, unmistakable voice filled the hospital corridor. A practical solution to a biological problem. All that's required is a non-disclosure agreement. Otherwise, Harrison's lawyers will destroy her. Gia Romano published it 10 minutes ago, David said, his voice flat. It's everywhere. The Dubois family just pulled the merger. They've issued a press release citing the morals clause and catastrophic reputational damage. The board is holding an emergency vote in the next 10 minutes. Harry, they're going to oust you. They're invoking your own conduct clause. Harrison looked at the phone. He heard Serafina's voice, the sound of the life he thought he wanted. He looked at the SICU door, behind which was the woman he had irrevocably broken. He looked down the hall toward the NICU, where his son was fighting for every single breath, his entire life, his company, his reputation, his billions. It was all vanishing, burning to the ground in real time. Sterling Dynamics, the company he'd bled for, was in free fall. He was ruined. He looked at Chloe, the one person who had been telling the truth all along. He's in the NICU. Leo, Harrison said, his voice barely a whisper. Will you make sure he's okay? Until she can. Until she's strong enough? Chloe stared at him, bewildered. This was not the man from the lobby. This was a ghost. She saw the crumpled paternity test in his hand, saw the total, devastating defeat in his eyes. I'll take care of them, Chloe said, her voice firm. I always have. Harrison Sterling nodded, a single, sharp dip of his chin. He didn't go to the elevators. He didn't call his driver. He turned and walked toward the stairwell. He pushed through the heavy fire door and walked out of the main entrance of Mount Eden, past the gathering swarm of paparazzi who were now shouting his name, their cameras flashing like weapons. He didn't see them. He didn't hear them. He just walked. He had lost his empire. He had lost his future. and in a sterile room, 2 floors up, he had just, finally, found his son. The reckoning was complete. The road to redemption, however, was a lifetime long, and it was just beginning. What a story. It's a brutal reminder that wealth and power cannot protect you from the consequences of your own choices. Harrison Sterling had it all, but his pride, his arrogance, and his refusal to trust cost him everything. He lost his empire, his fiancée, and the woman he once loved, all in the span of 24 hours. But in that loss, he gained the one thing he never knew he wanted: a son. Elena and baby Leo survived, thanks to her own strength, the dedication of doctors like Aris Thorne, and the fierce loyalty of her friend, Chloe. Their story isn't a fairy tale with a happy ending. It's a real-life story of survival, consequences, and the high price of a second chance. What do you think? Was Harrison's downfall justice? Can he ever truly atone for what he did to Elena? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that you won't want to miss. Click that notification bell so you never miss a story. Thanks for listening. Have you ever wished you could go back in time and show the people who hurt you just how wrong they were? For Helen Vance, her 15-year high school reunion was supposed to be a quiet night of facing old ghosts. But her ex-husband Mark had other plans. In front of everyone they had ever known, he decided to make her the punchline of a cruel joke, shaming her for the life she lived after he left. He thought he was putting her in her place, reminding her that he was the best she would ever have. He was wrong. What he didn't know was that in the middle of his vicious tirade, the doors would swing open and a man would walk in who could buy and sell Mark's entire world with a single phone call, Helen's new husband. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a glossy catalogue for artisanal kitchenware and a bill for the estate's water reclamation system. It was thick, cream-coloured cardstock, the kind of quality that suggested an event trying a little too hard to be important. The Northgate High School crest, a stylized eagle, clutching a book, was embossed in a garish gold at the top. Below it, in an elegant cursive font, were the words, "You are invited to your 15-year reunion." Helen Vance Croft stared at it, her fingers tracing the raised lettering. A strange cold sensation, like a drop of icy water on a warm stovetop, sizzled in her stomach. 15 years. Had it really been that long? Some days high school felt like a different lifetime, a story she'd read about someone else. Other days, like today, the memories were so vivid, they felt like ghosts breathing on her neck. She could almost smell the chlorine from the school pool, hear the squeak of sneakers on the polished gymnasium floor, and feel the familiar gnawing anxiety that had been her constant companion through those 4 years. High school had not been the highlight of her life. It was the place where she learned to make herself small, to blend into the background, and it was where she had met Mark Peterson. Mark, her high school sweetheart, her first everything, the charming, popular quarterback who had, for reasons she never fully understood, chosen her the quiet, bookish girl in the back of the class. Their romance had been the stuff of teenage dreams, or so it had seemed. They were voted cutest couple, their picture immortalized in the 1990 yearbook. They married 2 years after graduation, a young couple full of naive certainty, convinced their love was the kind that conquered all. It wasn't. Their marriage had unraveled slowly then, all at once, like a cheap sweater snagged on a nail. The charming boy became a man suffocated by his own fading glory. He resented that his life hadn't turned out like the highlight reel he'd imagined. He worked a respectable but unremarkable sales job at a mid-tier tech company, and the bitterness festered. He started to blame Helen for it, for being an anchor on his ambitions, for not being the trophy wife he felt he deserved. The last 2 years of their marriage were a slow, painful erosion of her self-worth, a daily barrage of subtle digs, dismissive comments, and open contempt. The divorce, when it came, was less of a heartbreak and more of a mercy. She had struggled afterward. Mark made sure of that, fighting her on every petty detail, leaving her with next to nothing. She'd worked 2 jobs, waitressing by night, stocking shelves at a bookstore by day, just to afford the rent on a tiny, drafty apartment. She'd eaten ramen noodles and dreamed of a day when she could buy groceries without checking her bank balance first. It was a humbling, exhausting period of her life, but it was also the time she had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, on her own terms. A soft, clinking sound brought her back to the present. Her husband, Julian Croft, was setting 2 mugs of steaming tea on the marble island in their sun-drenched kitchen. The kitchen alone was larger than her entire post-divorce apartment. "You've been staring at that for 10 minutes, he said, his voice a low, calming rumble. "Bad news." Julian was not a man who commanded attention with noise or bluster, but with a profound stillness. He was the founder and CEO of Elysian Systems, a name synonymous with revolutionary AI and quantum computing. To the world, he was a reclusive genius, a tech titan who rarely gave interviews or appeared in public. To Helen, he was the man who saw her, truly saw her, when she felt invisible. They had met at the bookstore where she worked. He'd come in looking for a rare first edition of a poetry collection, and they had talked for 2 hours. He hadn't cared that her hands were calloused or that she wore a faded apron. He had been captivated by her mind, her quiet strength, and the sad, beautiful wisdom in her eyes. She pushed the invitation across the island towards him. A memo from a past life. He picked it up, his brow furrowed as he read. "Northgate High, class of 2010. Is this something you want to attend?" "I don't know," she confessed, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "My first instinct is to toss it in the shredder and pretend it never came." "Because of him?" Julian asked gently. He didn't need to say the name. Helen nodded. "Mark will be there. He was Mr. Northgate High. He wouldn't miss a chance to relive his glory days and hold court. And his new wife, Tiffany Hale, was the head cheerleader, my personal high school tormentor. The thought of being in the same room with them. It just feels like walking back into a cage I fought so hard to escape." Julian came around the island and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. His presence was a solid, comforting weight. "The Helen I know isn't in a cage," he murmured into her hair. "The Helen I know built a new world for herself from the ashes of her old one. She went back to school, got her degree in art history, and now she curates one of the most respected private collections in the country. She's strong, she's brilliant." He paused, his lips brushing her temple. "And she is loved, completely." His words were a balm on the old wound. Everything he said was true. Her life now was beyond anything she could have imagined. They lived in a stunning, minimalist mansion overlooking the Pacific, filled with more art than furniture. She traveled the world acquiring pieces for Julian's collection, her opinion respected by gallery owners and artists alike. She had a life of purpose, passion, and profound love. What if he says something? She whispered, the old fear still a flicker in her heart. He knows how to get under my skin. He'll see you see this life, and he'll twist it into something ugly. He'll say I'm a gold digger, or that I got lucky. Then let him, Julian said, his voice firm. His words have no power over you anymore, Helen. They are the ramblings of a bitter man stuck in the past. You've moved on. Maybe going to this reunion isn't about him. Maybe it's about you. A chance to walk into that room, not as the person you were, but as the person you are, and close that chapter for good. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, especially not to him. But perhaps you need to prove it to yourself. He was right. The thought of facing Mark still terrified her, but the thought of letting that fear control her was worse. This wasn't about impressing him or seeking revenge. It was about reclaiming her own history, standing in the place where she had felt so small, and knowing unequivocally how far she had come. I have that board meeting in Geneva. Julian added, but my flight back lands around 9 that night. The reunion is at the old Grand Regency downtown, isn't it? It's not far from the airport. A slow smile spread across Helen's face. Are you suggesting you might crash my high school reunion? I'm suggesting, he said, turning her around to face him, that you should go. Stand on your own 2 feet because I know you can. And if for any reason you want or need me, they're just text. I'll be your getaway driver, your backup, or just the man who is endlessly proud to be your husband. The choice is yours. She looked down at the invitation, then back up into his steady, loving eyes. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a new feeling resolve. Okay, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. Okay, I'll go. The Grand Regency Hotel was a relic of a bygone era, all plush red carpets, crystal chandeliers, and the faint lingering scent of polish and perfume. It was the kind of place that hosted weddings and corporate galas, and apparently high school reunions for people clinging to the memory of their youth. As Helen handed her coat to the attendant, she could hear the muffled thumping of a bass line from the ballroom down the hall, a generic pop song from the late 2000s that instantly transported her back 15 years. She took a deep breath, smoothing down the front of her dress. It was a simple, elegant sheath of deep sapphire silk. It was understated, but impeccably tailored, the kind of dress that whispered confidence rather than screaming for attention. Her hair was styled in a chic low chignon, and her only jewelry was a pair of delicate diamond earrings and the simple, beautiful wedding band on her finger. She looked nothing like the shy, frizzy-haired girl in second-hand clothes she'd once been. She was a woman who knew her own worth. At least that's what she told herself. Walking into the ballroom was like stepping through a time warp. The room was decorated in their old-school colors, navy blue and gold. A large banner proclaiming, Northgate Eagles Class of 2010. 15 years, hung crookedly above the stage. People were clumped together in familiar circles, their faces older, etched with the fine lines of mortgages, parenthood, and careers, but their social dynamics were hauntingly the same. The jocks were by the bar, their laughter booming. The theatre kids were gesticulating wildly in a corner, and in the center of the room, holding court like a king in his dwindling fiefdom, was Mark Peterson. Helen's heart gave a painful thud against her ribs. He looked the same, yet different. He'd put on some weight around the middle, and his hairline was making a strategic retreat, but he still had that easy, arrogant grin. He was wearing a suit that was just a little too tight, a little too shiny, and clinging to his arm, looking like a slightly faded, more brittle version of her teenage self, was Tiffany Hale, now Tiffany Peterson. Her blonde hair was still bleached to perfection, and her smile was still a weapon. For a moment, Helen considered turning around and walking right back out. But then she remembered Julian's words. This is about you. She squared her shoulders and made her way towards the far side of the room, hoping to find a few of her kinder, quieter friends from the past. Amy Vance, oh my God, is that you? The voice belonged to Sarah Chen, her old lab partner from AP Chemistry. Sarah was now a pediatrician, her face warm and friendly, her eyes kind. "Sarah, it's so good to see you," Helen said, genuinely relieved. "You look amazing." "So do you. You look serene," Sarah said, searching for the right word. "Like you have your life completely figured out. What have you been up to last I heard after you and, you were working at that little bookstore downtown?" There was no malice in Sarah's question, only curiosity. Before Helen could answer, another voice cut in sharp and saccharine. "Oh, she's moved way up from selling books, haven't you, Amy?" Tiffany had materialized beside them, her eyes sweeping over Helen's dress with thinly veiled assessment. Mark was right behind her, his signature smirk firmly in place. "It's Helen, actually," Helen corrected her voice, calm and even. "Right. Helen," Tiffany said, drawing the name out. "Mark and I were just talking about you the other day, wondering whatever happened to you. You sort of dropped off the face of the earth after the divorce. We just assumed you moved away, started over somewhere less competitive." The insinuation was clear that she couldn't handle living in the same city as their success. "I'm still here," Helen said simply. "I just have a different circle these days." Mark stepped forward, clapping a hand on the shoulder of another former football player, David. "Hey, Dave, you remember my first wife, Amy?" he announced, his voice loud enough for the entire group to hear. "She was the quiet one, always had her nose in a book. I had to teach her everything she knew about having fun." A few people chuckled awkwardly. Mark thrived on this kind of attention, turning his own history into a performance. Helen felt a hot flush of anger and embarrassment creep up her neck, but she refused to let them see it. "I remember you preferring books to my football games," he continued, a mock pout on his face. "Guess some things never change. You still hiding out in libraries?" "I work in the art world now," Helen replied, keeping her tone neutral. "I'm a curator." Mark laughed, a short, barking sound. "A curator, is that what they call it? Dusting off old paintings for some rich guy." "That's cute. At least you found a hobby." He looked at Tiffany with a smug expression, as if to say, "See, I told you she never amounted to anything." Tiffany patted his arm. "Don't be mean, honey. I think it's sweet that Amy found something to keep her busy. We all need our little projects." The condescension was suffocating. Every word was a carefully crafted jab designed to minimize her, to put her back in the box she had occupied in high school. She was no longer just the quiet girl. She was now Mark's starter wife. The failed experiment before he upgraded. Sarah shot Helen a sympathetic look, but she was outmatched by the sheer force of Mark and Tiffany's shared cruelty. Helen wanted to defend herself, to tell them about her work, about Julian, about the incredible life she had built. But she knew it would be pointless. They weren't interested in the truth. They were only interested in their own narrative, one in which they were the winners. And she was the loser. Anything she said would only be twisted and used as more fodder for their amusement. So she simply smiled, a small, polite, infuriatingly serene smile. "It's more than a hobby," she said softly. "But I'm glad you two are happy." And with that, she excused herself, walking away towards the bar, her head held high, even as she felt their mocking gazes burning into her back. The night was just beginning, and she had a sinking feeling it was going to get much, much worse. Helen found a small, unoccupied table in a dimly lit corner, nursing a glass of sparkling water she'd procured from the bar. From her vantage point, she could observe the reunion without being at the center of it. It was like watching a nature documentary about a species she used to belong to. The preening, the posturing, The ritualistic displays of success, it was all there. People flashed photos of their children, name-dropped their job titles, and casually mentioned their recent vacations to exotic locales. She saw people she had genuinely liked, and she exchanged warm waves and brief, pleasant chats. But the gravitational pull of the room always seemed to lead back to Mark and Tiffany. They were the sun around which the lesser planets of their old clique still orbited. About an hour into the event, Mark took the stage. As former class president, he'd been given the honor of making a toast. He tapped the microphone, and a wave of feedback screeched through the room. Testing still works," he joked, and his friends roared with laughter. "Wow, 15 years. Look at us. We're not kids anymore. We've got mortgages, 401ks, and a few more grey hairs." He ran a hand through his own thinning hair, eliciting another round of chuckles. He went on for a few minutes, rattling off the standard reunion platitudes about the good old days and the bonds that never break. It was generic and harmless enough. But then his eyes found Helen in her corner. A predatory glint appeared in them, the look of a shark that has just spotted a lone swimmer. "You know," he said, leaning into the mic, his voice taking on a confidential conspiratorial tone, "high school is where you learn the most important lessons. It's where you learn who you are, what you're made of, and who's really got your back. It's where you find the people who are going to help you soar, and you learn to recognize the people who will only hold you down." His gaze was fixed on her now. The rest of the room faded into the background. It was just him on a stage with a microphone, and her pinned by the spotlight of his words. "I made some mistakes back then." He continued, a false humility creeping into his voice. "I thought loyalty meant sticking with someone no matter what, even if they weren't willing to grow with you. I learned the hard way that you can't carry someone else's dead weight forever. Sometimes you have to cut the cord to save yourself, and I am so glad I did." He raised his glass. "To my beautiful wife, Tiffany, the best decision I ever made. My co-pilot, not my baggage." The room erupted in applause, mostly from their circle, but others joined in, caught up in the moment. It was a brutal public repudiation of their entire history together. He had just called her dead weight. Baggage. He had reduced their 8 years of marriage to a cautionary tale about his own brilliant decision to leave her. Helen felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands trembled, and she set her water glass down before she dropped it. She could feel the curious, pitying glances from those around her who knew exactly who he was talking about. She wanted to be invisible, to shrink into the floor and disappear. The polite smile she had worn as armor was gone, replaced by a mask of numb shock. After his speech, the music swelled again, and people began to mingle more freely. Helen stayed rooted to her chair, trying to breathe, trying to push back the wave of humiliation that threatened to drown her. A few minutes later, Mark appeared at her table, a fresh drink in his hand and a triumphant smirk on his face. "Hey, no hard feelings about the speech, huh, Amy?" he said, sliding into the chair opposite her. "Just telling it like it is. It's all about growth, you know." "That was a cruel thing to do, Mark," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Was it? I thought it was inspiring." He countered, leaning back in his chair with an air of supreme self-satisfaction. "People need to hear stories like ours. It shows them that it's never too late to trade up. Look at me now. Regional sales director, beautiful wife who supports my career, 2 great kids. And you, well, you're curating." He said the word as if it was something distasteful. "I have a good life, Mark." "Do you?" He pressed his eyes, scanning her simple dress and single glass of water. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're here all alone." I heard you were dating someone, but I guess that didn't pan out either. No shame in that. It's tough to find someone who can handle, well, your level of intensity. Intensity was his code word for the ambition she'd finally discovered after leaving him the drive to get her degree, to build a career, to become someone he couldn't control. Where is this mystery man anyway? He goaded. Couldn't get a date for your own reunion. That's rough. Don't worry, I'm sure there's a cat waiting for you at home. Each word was a deliberate poisoned dart aimed at the insecurities he had spent years cultivating in her. He was painting a picture for anyone who might be listening. Helen, the lonely, bitter spinster, forever living in the shadow of the great Mark Peterson. She stood up abruptly. I'm not having this conversation with you. Running away, same old Amy, he scoffed. You know, for all that strength you pretend to have, you never could handle a little honesty. Helen didn't look back. She walked towards the exit, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Not here. Not ever again. She just needed to get out to escape the suffocating weight of the past he was so determined to bury her under. Helen didn't make it to the exit. She was intercepted by Jessica, a former classmate who had always been on the periphery of their social circle. Jessica was a notorious gossip, her eyes wide with a hungry, feigned sympathy. Helen, are you okay? Jessica asked, her hand fluttering to Helen's arm. What Mark said up there was just awful. I can't believe he would be so tasteless. Before Helen could offer a polite non-answer, Mark's voice boomed from behind them. He had followed her, and he'd brought an audience. Tiffany was with him, along with David and a few other acolytes from their glory days. Tasteless, I call it, telling the truth, Mark declared, stepping into their path. He was clearly drunk now, his face flushed, and his movements overly confident. Amy here just can't handle it. She always lived in this little fantasy world. He turned to the growing circle of onlookers, his voice projecting across the now quieter ballroom. The DJ seemed to have taken a break, and the lull in the music created a natural stage for Mark's cruelty. Let me tell you all a story about our Amy, he began, slinging an arm around David's shoulder. After we split, I was worried about her. I really was. I'd drive by her little shoebox apartment sometimes, just to make sure the lights were on. She was working 2 jobs, bless her heart, slinging hash at some greasy spoon diner till 2 in the morning. I remember thinking, wow, this is what she chose over me. Sad, isn't it? He was airing her struggles, her most vulnerable moments, as a public spectacle. He was taking the hardest time of her life, a time when she had worked herself to the bone to survive, and twisting it into a pathetic failure. He was erasing her resilience and replacing it with a narrative of pity. I even offered to help her out. He lied, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. I told her, Amy, you don't have to do this. I can help you get on your feet. But she was too proud, too stubborn, wanted to make it on her own. How'd that work out for you? Amy still living on tips and dreaming of a better life. Helen stood frozen, a pillar of ice in a sea of fire. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and second-hand embarrassment. Her past was being rewritten, edited, and performed by the one person who knew exactly how to hurt her most. Tiffany chimed in, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. He was so good to you, Helen. You were always so ungrateful. Mark gave you the best years of his life, and you just held him back. Everyone could see it. She was afraid of my success, Mark added, nodding sagely, as if he were revealing a profound truth. I was getting promotions, closing big deals, and she was content. She didn't have the drive. That's the real reason we divorced. I was a rocket ship and she was a boat anchor. You can't soar with the eagles if you're weighed down by a turkey. The cheap metaphor, something he probably heard in a sales seminar, hung in the air. The cruelty was so blatant, so utterly without merit that it left Helen speechless. She opened her mouth to speak, to say something, anything, but what could she say? The truth of her life with Julian was so extraordinary, so far beyond their petty comprehension, that it would sound like a desperate lie. Actually, my husband is a billionaire, and I travel the world curating priceless art. They would laugh her out of the room. Mark saw her silence as a victory. He stepped closer, his voice, dropping to a low, mocking hiss, meant just for her, but loud enough for those nearby to hear. Look at you, all dressed up with nowhere to go. You came here alone, hoping someone would notice you. Didn't you? Hoping to make me jealous. He let out a short, pitying laugh. It's okay to admit it. I was the best thing that ever happened to you, and you know it. It must kill you every single day knowing you let me go. He was inches from her face, his breath sour with alcohol and self-satisfaction. This was the moment he had been building towards all night, the final crushing blow, the public confirmation of his superiority. Some people just peak in high school and then fade away, he said, turning to address his audience again. It's sad, really. He looked back at Helen, his eyes devoid of any warmth. I guess you never found anyone to fill my shoes, huh, Amy? The question hung in the air, a final, definitive insult. The room was silent, waiting for her response, waiting for the tears, waiting for her to break. Helen's phone, tucked away in her small clutch, vibrated silently with a text message she couldn't see. It read, "Landed. Everything okay." But she didn't need to see it. At that precise moment, as Mark's smug, triumphant face loomed before her, the grand double doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung open with a soft, authoritative swoosh. The sound was not loud, but in the tense silence, it was as dramatic as a thunderclap. Every head in the room turned to look. A man stood in the doorway. He wasn't tall in the way a basketball player is tall, but he possessed a presence that seemed to alter the very dimensions of the room. He was dressed in a way that defied easy categorization. It wasn't a tuxedo or a flashy designer suit. It was a simple dark charcoal suit, but the cut of it, the way the fabric draped over his frame, spoke of a quality so refined it was almost invisible. It was the kind of clothing that costs more than a car, but is designed to never shout about it. His hair was dark with subtle threads of silver at the temples, and his face was starkly handsome, with intelligent eyes that seemed to absorb everything in a single sweeping glance. He projected an aura of unshakable calm, an unnerving stillness in the midst of the gawking crowd. He didn't look lost or out of place. He looked like he owned the place, and was perhaps mildly disappointed in its current state. A ripple of confusion went through the ballroom. Whispers broke out. "Who is that? Is he with the hotel? No way! Look at his watch!" Mark, thrown off balance by the interruption, turned around. He saw the stranger, and his brow furrowed in annoyance. "Can we help you?" He called out, his tone belligerent. "This is a private event." The man in the doorway ignored him completely. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing the clusters of curious faces, moving with deliberate purpose until they found Helen. And when they did, his expression softened instantly. The cool, analytical observer was replaced by a look of such profound tenderness and concern that it was a physical force in the room. He began to walk forward. He didn't hurry his pace, measured and unbothered. The crowd, which had been a chaotic mess of old classmates, seemed to part for him instinctively like iron filings before a magnet. People shuffled back, creating a clear path from the door, directly to where Helen stood, trapped in the crucible Mark had created. Helen felt the air shift. The suffocating pressure on her chest lessened with every step he took towards her. It was Julian. He had come. She hadn't even called, hadn't texted, but he was here. He must have just known. Mark watched the man's approach, his drunken arrogance turning into confused hostility. Who was this guy? Why was everyone staring? And why was he walking directly towards Helen? "Hey, buddy, I said this is a private party," Mark repeated, stepping forward to block his path. It was a foolish, reflexive assertion of dominance, the kind of move a dog makes when a larger, calmer animal enters its territory. Julian didn't even break stride. He didn't look at Mark. He simply angled his shoulder slightly, a subtle, fluid movement that bypassed Mark so effortlessly it was almost insulting. Mark was left standing there, having tried to block a river that simply flowed around him. Julian came to a stop directly in front of Helen. The whispers in the room died down to a collective held breath. He gently reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers warm against her skin. He leaned in, and in front of the entire Northgate High class of 2010, he kissed her. It wasn't a dramatic, showy kiss, but one of quiet intimacy, a gesture of reassurance that shut out the entire world. "Sorry I'm late, my love," he murmured, his voice low, and for her ears only, though the sentiment was clear to everyone watching. The call with Tokyo ran long. Helen's entire posture changed. The tension fell from her shoulders, the fear in her eyes was replaced by a radiant, overwhelming relief. She was no longer the lonely victim. She was a woman who was deeply, visibly loved. Mark stared, his jaw slack. Tiffany's perfectly painted smile had frozen and was beginning to crack. Who was this man? And why had he just called Helen his Amy, my love? The scene didn't compute. It was a glitch in the reality he had so carefully constructed. The spell of silence was broken by a sudden, sharp gasp from a man standing near the edge of the circle. His name was Kevin Tanaka, a quiet, nerdy guy from high school who had gone on to become a surprisingly successful day trader. His face was pale, and he was staring at Julian as if he'd seen a ghost. "No way!" Kevin whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "It can't be." Tiffany, desperate to regain control of the narrative, turned on him. "What is it, Kevin? Do you know this guy? Is he an actor or something?" She was grasping for an explanation that made sense, one where this man was a hired prop in some pathetic attempt by Helen to save face. Kevin shook his head, his eyes wide. He looked from Julian to Helen and back again. That's Julian Croft." The name hung in the air for a moment, meaningless to most of the people in the room. Mark snorted. Julian, who never heard of him. But Kevin wasn't talking to Mark. He was talking to the room, to anyone who would listen. Julian Croft, the founder of Elysian Systems. The man who basically invented predictive AI. He's a recluse. He never makes public appearances. He's on the cover of Forbes and Wired this month. They call him the ghost of Silicon Valley. He's worth, God, I don't even know, $50–60 billion. A second wave of silence swept the room, but this one was different. It wasn't born of curiosity. It was born of pure, unadulterated shock. The information ricocheted from person to person in a series of frantic whispers. Elysian Systems, Billionaire, Julian Croft. People began pulling out their phones, fingers flying across screens. A moment later, the faces of the crowd were illuminated by the glow of their devices, all displaying the same images: Julian Croft on magazine covers, Julian Croft in articles about the future of technology. Julian Croft, the man currently holding Helen's hand, as if it were the most precious object in the world. The atmosphere of the room didn't just shift, it underwent a quantum realignment. This was no longer a high school reunion. It was an audience with royalty. The smirks and pitying looks directed at Helen vanished, replaced by expressions of awe, envy, and utter bewilderment. She wasn't the lonely, struggling ex-wife. She was Helen Vance Croft, wife of a living legend. Mark stood as if he'd been turned to stone. His brain struggled to process the information. Billionaire. The quiet, boring girl he'd divorced, the waitress he had just publicly shamed, was married to one of the richest, most powerful men on the planet. It was impossible. It was a joke. It had to be a joke. He looked at Julian, then at Helen, whose serene expression now looked less like weakness and more like unshakable confidence. He saw her simple, elegant dress not as a sign of her modest means, but as the choice of a woman who had nothing to prove. He saw the way Julian looked at her with a depth of adoration and respect that Mark, in his heart of hearts, knew he had never been capable of feeling for anyone, let alone her. The foundation of his world, built on the belief in his own superiority, crumbled to dust in a matter of seconds. Tiffany was the first to recover, or at least to attempt it. Her social instincts, honed over years of cheerleading and social climbing, took over. She plastered a dazzlingly fake smile on her face and glided towards them. "Well, Helen, you have been keeping secrets," she chirped, extending a hand towards Julian. "Tiffany Peterson, it is an absolute honor to meet you." Mark speaks so highly of Helen's time with him. He really helped shape her into the woman she is today. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to associate themselves with this newfound power, to claim some small credit for Helen's incredible new reality. Julian looked down at Tiffany's outstretched hand, but made no move to take it. His gaze was glacial. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finally landing on Mark, truly seeing him for the first time. The quiet power in that look made Mark feel like an insect under a microscope. The room held its breath, waiting for the Titan to speak. Julian's attention remained on Mark, his expression unreadable but intensely focused. The silence stretched, becoming more uncomfortable with each passing second. Mark fidgeted, his drunken bravado evaporating under the weight of that silent, analytical gaze. Finally, Julian spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it was pitched at a level of such perfect clarity that it cut through the room's stunned hush. "You must be Mark," he said. It wasn't a question. "Helen has mentioned you." A flicker of hope, pathetic and misguided, crossed Mark's face. "She has—" "Yes." Julian continued, his tone flat and devoid of emotion. "She told me that her first marriage taught her one of the most valuable lessons of her life." He paused, letting the statement hang in the air. Tiffany beamed, thinking this was a compliment. Mark puffed out his chest slightly. Julian's eyes narrowed. "She learned the profound difference between a partner who lifts you up and an anchor that tries to drown you. She considers it a master class in what not to look for in a human being." He shifted his gaze to Helen, and his voice warmed with sincere emotion. "So in a way, I suppose, I should thank you, Mark. Your cruelty was the crucible that forged the incredible woman I fell in love with. Your anchor-like qualities made her appreciate what it felt like to finally fly. Thank you for being the anchor." The insult was so elegantly delivered, so surgically precise, that it took a moment for its full impact to land. It wasn't an angry outburst. It was a calm, factual assessment. He hadn't called Mark a name. He had simply agreed with Mark's own rocket ship and anchor metaphor, and thanked him for playing his part so perfectly. A few stifled gasps and nervous coughs rippled through the onlookers. Tiffany's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of horrified disbelief. Mark's face cycled through a series of colors from flushed red to a sickly pale white. He was being dismantled piece by piece in front of everyone he had spent the entire night trying to impress. Now, there's no need for that," Mark stammered, trying to laugh it off. "It's a reunion. We're all old friends here, just joking around." "I'm not joking," Julian replied, his voice dropping even lower, becoming even colder. "I heard your final question to my wife as I was walking in. You asked if she ever found anyone to fill your shoes." He glanced down at Mark's scuffed, slightly too pointy dress shoes, then met his eyes again. "A man's character is not measured by the shoes he wears, but by the path he walks, and how he treats those who walk beside him. You seem to have chosen a path of petty cruelty and revisionist history. My wife, on the other hand, chose a path of grace and resilience. As for filling your shoes, I can assure you no one in their right mind would ever want to." The public humiliation was now complete. Mark had been exposed, his insecurities laid bare for all to see. The friends who had been laughing along with him moments before now avoided his gaze, shuffling their feet, and suddenly finding the ceiling tiles fascinating. They were distancing themselves from him, the social leper. Julian then turned his attention to the room at large. His demeanor shifted again, becoming that of the gracious, powerful leader the world knew him to be. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, his voice now warm and engaging. "It is wonderful to see so many of you here, celebrating your shared history. Helen has fond memories of her time at Northgate, especially the teachers who inspired her." He was rewriting the narrative on the spot, erasing the stain of Mark's toxicity and replacing it with one of nostalgic benevolence. In that spirit, he announced, the Croft Foundation would like to make a donation to the Northgate Alumni Fund. Let's say $5 million for the construction of a new technology and creative arts wing. A collective audible gasp filled the ballroom. $5 million. It was an unimaginable sum. "We believe strongly in fostering the next generation of innovators and artists," Julian continued smoothly. "And we would be honored if the school would accept the grant. There is only one condition." He paused for dramatic effect, his eyes sweeping the room before landing once again on Mark. "It is to be named the Helen Vance Croft Center for Innovation and the Arts." He had taken Helen's name, the one Mark had tried to drag through the mud, and he was having it carved in stone on the walls of the very institution where her humiliation began. It was not just a victory. It was a monument to her triumph. The announcement of the donation and its name was the final devastating blow. Mark Peterson stood there utterly broken. He had come to the reunion to be crowned king, to remind everyone of his status as the popular, successful man who had outgrown his small-town origins and his even smaller first wife. Instead, he had been reduced to a footnote in the story of her incredible success. Her name would now be a permanent fixture of their alma mater, a legacy of generosity and power, while he would be remembered only for his public implosion. But Julian wasn't quite finished. He looked directly at Mark, his expression now one of mild academic curiosity. "Peterson," he said, the surname sounding like a specimen in a jar. "You work for Omnitech Solutions, don't you? Regional Sales Director for the Tri-State area." Mark's blood ran cold. How did he know that? "Why, yes," he stammered. "How did you? My acquisitions team briefs me on all potential buyouts," Julian explained conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Omnitech has been on our radar for a few weeks. They have a promising piece of software we were interested in integrating. The deal was set to be finalized next quarter." A sliver of insane, desperate hope flickered in Mark's eyes. Was this a lifeline? Was the great Julian Croft about to offer him an olive branch, a job in his empire? Julian let the hope dangle for a second before mercilessly cutting the string. Key word being was, he said. Elysian Systems has a very strict zero-tolerance policy regarding toxic workplace behavior. We spend billions cultivating a culture of respect, collaboration, and basic human decency. I can't in good conscience bring a company into our portfolio that promotes people of your character to leadership positions. He pulled out his phone, his thumb moving deftly across the screen. I'm sending a message to my Chief of Staff right now. She will inform our M&A division to halt the Omnitech acquisition proceedings, effective immediately. He looked up from his phone, his eyes locking with Mark's. The reason cited will be a fundamental misalignment of corporate culture discovered during final due diligence. Your CIO will get the news on Monday morning. I'm sure he'll have questions for his tri-state regional director. The entire room understood the implication. Mark hadn't just embarrassed himself. He hadn't just lost face. He had, through his own arrogance and cruelty, single-handedly scuttled a multi-million-dollar acquisition deal for his company. He hadn't just lost his past. He had just torched his future. He was no longer just a bully. He was a liability. His career at Omnitech, and likely anywhere else in the industry, once word got out, was over. Tiffany looked like she was going to be physically ill. She took a step away from Mark, a subtle, subconscious act of self-preservation. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and it was plummeting to earth in a ball of fire. Having delivered the final fatal blow, Julian's demeanor softened as he turned back to his wife. All the power, all the icy authority melted away, leaving only the loving husband. "Shall we go home, Helen?" he asked gently. Helen looked at Mark one last time. She saw not a monster, but a small, pathetic man shrinking before her very eyes. There was no triumph in her heart, no desire for revenge. There was only a profound sense of peace. The chapter wasn't just closed. The book had been burned, its ashes scattered. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Let's go home." She took Julian's offered arm, and together they walked towards the exit. The crowd parted for them once more, their faces a mixture of awe and respect. As they passed, Helen caught Sarah Chen's eye. Her old lab partner was smiling, a look of genuine, unadulterated happiness on her face. Helen smiled back. They walked out of the ballroom and into the cool night air, leaving the ghosts of the past behind. They left Mark Peterson to face the silent, judging stares of everyone he had tried so desperately to impress his entire world in ruins around him. He had tried to write the ending to Helen's story, but he had only ended up writing his own tragic, pathetic epilogue. That night, Helen learned that the best revenge isn't loud and angry, but quiet and absolute. It's not about stooping to your tormentor's level, but about outgrowing them so completely that their attacks can no longer reach you. Mark wanted to shame her for the life she'd had, but he was powerless against the life she had built. Her story is a powerful reminder that your past does not define your future, and the cruelty of others is often just a reflection of their own failures. True strength lies in building a life of happiness and purpose, and the greatest victory is a life well lived. If this story of resilience and vindication resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story of karmic justice and ultimate triumph. What did you think of Mark's downfall? Let us know in the comments below.